Simon Coveney, about a quick agreement on security. Is that something that you too would like to see?
Yes, we want to see a good, ambitious agreement on security. Obviously, that's going to be part of the negotiations, but we think that is an important part and something we want to see. And I would just say Simon's absolutely right. This is a weekend to also celebrate the fantastic work that both he, Julian Smith and the people across Northern Ireland, across all the parties have done to get that devolved authority back up and running.
Can I ask you about some of the specific things that will be on your desk right now? One of them is Europol and the European arrest warrant. Now, that's very, very important to our sense of security in this country, the way the police operate. And it's not clear at the moment how we're going to carry on in our involvement in that, because they both involve the European Court of Justice. How are you going to square that circle, and what are you asking for?
Well, I'm sure you'll appreciate, as I've said in various ways before, I'm not going to go into details about our negotiating position, but we do want to continue to be part of Europol. And let's remember there are countries who have agreements with and are actually present in Europol, like the United States, who are not members of the EU, and Europol was around before the institutions of the EU. So this is doable.
But it's now got the European Court sitting above it.
Well, the United States have found a way that works for them to be able to be involved with and have a very large presence. In fact, I think in terms of people, arguably, the largest presence at Europol. So there are ways of doing this. We're an important partner in Europol. A lot of what Europol does is through and driven by us. So I think it's in both parties' interests. And as I say, we're very ambitious for a good, holistic agreement across security.
So we'd like to stay part or very closely aligned to Europol and the arrest warrant system. Let me ask you about something else, which is the Schengen Information System, which is the database. And that's really, really important if the police or anybody else is trying to find a missing person, someone's absconded, maybe it's a missing relative or whatever. And I think in the last year, we made more than 500 million applications for information from that system. Will we remain part of it after we leave? Well,
this is, again, Andrew, a very good example of why we want a really ambitious agreement on security, because all of these things play parts in our law enforcement, not just on pure national security, but as you said rightly, with our day-to-day policing work, whether it's the European arrest warrant, whether it's the Schengen Agreement, PNR records, PRUM, all of these things are important. As I say, we're ambitious for an agreement, but we've got to get an agreement that's right, not just for our friends and partners in the EU, but us here in the UK, and respecting the fact that we are leaving the European Union.
Of course, but I mean, it's complicated stuff. If we can't get a single overarching agreement, what do you feel about the prospect of a series of, as it were, smaller agreements that tide us over the end of this year, including security, maybe aviation, fishing, whatever it might be?
Well, I prefer to say focus on what we've agreed in the withdrawal agreement, and the withdrawal agreement does outline both here, the UK government and the European Union are committed to getting that comprehensive agreement across the board. I think we can do it. This is where I slightly disagree with Simon. I think it can be done, not just because both parties in that agreement are committed to doing it, and want to do it. But we're a country that has already got a known pattern of work with the EU, and therefore getting a holistic agreement in the next 12 months, I think, is achievable. And the Prime Minister's got a pretty good record of getting things done.
So the big problem that we've got, of course, and he alluded to it as well, is that the EU is still saying we can do this, we can do it within a year as long as it's a level playing field. And the Prime Minister is saying again and again, no, we must diverge. So that is going to, the more we diverge, the harder these talks are going to be.
Well, any negotiation is obviously going to be difficult and important, and some parts of it are complicated. But let's remember, we are talking about a Prime Minister where people said we couldn't reopen the withdrawal agreement. He did that in under 100 days, got a new agreement, said we couldn't get it through Parliament. We got the general election, got a majority, and just this week we had that vote. We are leaving the European Union. So I think Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, Andrew, has shown that he can get these things done, and I think we will.
A very, very straightforward question, a big question. Do you consider that our security as a country is part of this negotiation?
Well, I think it's making the security agreements, the relationships we have, are something we do need to negotiate. And there is a holistic agreement across our partnership, both in terms of trade and in terms of security. We've got to talk to our partners in the EU to see how we... Well, they're not, trade and security do cross over. Let's be very clear. When you think about customs and tariffs, it's the border force that I'm responsible for that do those checks at the border for HMRCs. There is an interlink, but we do want to make sure we've got a really ambitious programme of action for what we want to achieve on security, because it is in all our interests. Security now doesn't just apply here in the UK, and it doesn't just apply in the EU. We've just seen recently with some fantastic work that the National Crime Agency have done on paedophilia that actually goes across to Korea and all around the world. This is a global challenge. The more we work together, the better.
Well, thinking of global challenges, we all woke up this morning to the news about our ambassador in Tehran, went to a vigil for the victims of the air disaster, turned into a demonstration, went to get his hair cut and was lifted by the Iranians and apprehended against, I think, every single rule of international diplomacy. First of all, have you spoken to him? Do you know how he is?
I haven't personally spoken to the ambassador, but as a government, we have done. He's actually tweeted, I think, in the last hour or so about what happened. It's completely unacceptable. I think you're right. Breach of certainly the Vienna Convention, a whole range of things. Iran is at a crossroads. They've got a decision to make. And the point we're making, the Foreign Secretary has said just this morning, is we want to see things de-escalate. We want to see Iran come back into that international fold and play their part. But they are at a crossroads, and they've got to make that decision. We want to see them come back in and de-escalate.
A very sensitive moment. Do we respond to what's happened to our ambassador beyond protesting verbally?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into details about the conversations we're having around some of the details, particularly because some of these link in with security at the moment. I hope you'll appreciate that. But what they've done is completely unacceptable. It is a breach, and we want to see them make the right decision at the crossroads they're currently at.
All right, let me ask you about another really important and imminent security-related decision. The Americans have made it absolutely clear that if we allow Huawei into our 5G system, we will lose intelligence from them as a result. What's your own personal opinion about what we should do?
Well, look, as this is a decision the government's going to be making relatively soon, I'm afraid I'm not going to give you a running commentary or personal view or anything else on where we are with this. We do take serious consideration of all of the issues around these kind of decisions. We have got some very serious decisions to make in the period ahead around a whole range of things on security. Every day there's things we have to look at. I do know what I think, but as the security minister who's a member of the government, I'm afraid I'm going to have that conversation in government as part of the decision we make.
Let me try something else then. The last time we talked, I asked you about the report into Russian involvement in our elections. And you said, yes, you'd read it and it would be published after the election. It is now definitely after the election. Yeah. So when is it going to be published?
Well, we've got one of the things around the rules, the way these things work, is that you have to have a chairman of the select committee. We don't have that yet, but we will have that soon. That report will be published in due course.
Can you at least say it will be published by the end of this month?
Well, that's a matter. The House
you can't even say that.
Well, because the House authorities haven't started the chairman of the select committee process yet. Once they get, you have to have a chairman of the select committee in place.
You've read the report. What is in the report the government doesn't want to see the public
see, now there, Andrew, you're tempting me into to giving you details of a report that we haven't published yet.
Anything.
And that would be a hugely inappropriate.
A fragment would do me.
As I said to you before, we will publish the report. The government will be responding as we do to select committee reports. But you have to, yes, have that general election out of the way. That's done, and we've got that majority. We'll get a new select committee for that chairman put in place, and then we can look at publishing that report.
Are there any circumstances at all in which the government would allow Harry and Meghan not to be properly protected?
Well, look, again, I'm afraid I'm into that realm where...
It's a straightforward question.
No, it's not actually, because to comment on the security... Well, in the sense of... to comment on the security of any individuals puts at risk, not just the individuals, but the people who do the security.
I'm asking you about who pays for their security. Is there any circumstances in which the British government would not fund security arrangements for Prince Harry and Meghan?
And again, we have never commented on the money and how the money is spent and what we spend on security for individuals, royal family or other protected individuals. And I'm afraid, as tempting as it is, Andrew, I'm not going to start that this morning.
All right, let's ask you a wider question. You've been a great supporter of the royal family. You've seen the opinion polls this morning. Younger people are very, very supportive of Harry and Meghan. If they are lost, as it were, to the royal family, what does that do to the institution?
Well, you're right. Look, I am a huge fan of the royal family. I think what they do, not just for our soft power, but the organisations, the charities that they work with and they represent is actually, I think, pretty much invaluable. I think there's something we as a country should be very proud of. And Harry and Meghan themselves, I think, have said in one of their statements that they look to continue working with organisations and charities. That's good news for those organisations and charities. Exactly what they do and how they move forward as time goes on is a matter for them and the royal family.
Why did Conservatives vote against allowing refugee children to be reconciled, reunited with their families?
Well, I think that's a bit of a misrepresentation, if I can say. No. What we've done, the withdrawal agreement, is about setting out how we leave the European Union. The government's policy on resettling children in this country hasn't changed. Let's remember...
It was a straightforward moral choice, and you took one side.
No. We have had 41,000 children since 2010, some 7,500 last year alone. Our policy hasn't changed. We want to negotiate that with the European Union, who are the other side of this discussion.
So what was wrong with what Alf Dubs was proposing?
Because what we have said is we will report back to Parliament. We made quite a big commitment around making sure we report back to Parliament about what we're doing. The legislation around this is probably better suited to the immigration bill that will be coming later this year. This bill was about leaving the European Union, very specifically, and what we need to do that. And that is what it does. But our policy on unaccompanied children hasn't changed.
Brandon Lewis, not a lot of very clear answers, but thank you very much for joining us anyway. Cyrano